argue in 3 points, and never 10, never 15, never make your case in 29 points. Okay, it may seem impressive to you, but you're doing the wrong thing. You should simplify and have 3 headings. The 3 main headings are near is better than far, small than big, and simple than complex. And down at 5-point type in sans serif, of course, so it's easier to read, you've got personal is better than corporate, and physical than abstract. This is David Tulis. Our chief sponsor today is Nooganomics.com, the website for the man who matters, one that Dave Crockett reads, right? So if you're a big guy like Dave Crockett, you read Nooganomics.com. If he does, well, you certainly also should subscribe to Nooganomics.com. Our question today is in light of a big event going on in East Ridge, and that's the Homeschool Expo, where 1,000 families or so from around the Southeast will be visiting exhibitors and tellers of truth and folks who are giving lectures and talks about educational topics, all kinds of topics touching education, from math and reading. What are the best history books for young children? How can you teach certain subjects with this equipment or this software? How can you get the best art lessons for your child? We have artists there, all kinds of people at the Homeschool Expo. It's already in progress. It's going on till dinner time tonight, and also most of the day tomorrow. The name is David Tulis, and I do thank you for giving me just a minute of your time. Are there prospects for success if you are outside the establishment framework in, let's say, in education? Well, yes, you are. What about other areas of life that are outside the mainstream? And I believe that the marketplace would suggest that God Himself would suggest that yes, people are different, and let people find their own genius, find their own center of gravity, if you will, and prosper under God's grace and general grace and particular grace. Let them prosper as they're made. And to look at some of these questions, particularly in living in a place near Chattanooga, but not too near. In a rural setting, we have Dustin Sprick. He is a resident of Appleton and lives on 6 acres with his wife, Allison. The couple has, I guess, 4 children, ages 10, 9, 6, and 4, all boys except for a girl, the 9-year-old. Dustin, tell my listener how it is you decided that you were going to move out of the city into a somewhat rural setting of Appleton, east of Chattanooga.
Basically, my wife and I decided that homeschooling would be a good direction to go. We were interested in bringing up our kids with more emphasis on morality and character, and we were interested in developing that in them specifically for their good, and to follow God's commandments and His general principles of loving God first and then loving others. And we saw that homeschooling would be a good way to model that for us as parents. It's going to put a lot more pressure on us to be strong at those kinds of characteristics. So
if you're a homeschool dad, you have to perhaps be more watchful about moral questions, about your own moral framework, right? Your own relation with God, but also questions that touch on how do you get a child interested in a particular topic or particular activity. So you're much more active, you're saying.
Yeah. So each of our kids have different personalities. I have my 6-year-old. He is a person who is very strong-willed. He's a middle child, so right. So those tend to be strong wills, but his basic personality is that he is always right. He is the most right person you could possibly talk to. He knows more than everybody else, and there's no telling him what to do. It's more of a convincing that he really thinks that this is the right thing to do, and so you got characteristics like that. So that's its own challenge. And then you have people who are like my oldest son, who is very introverted and interested in many things, but is very tenacious when he is interested in a subject. He'll just like research it and check on it and follow it. And it's sort of like, if you're into sports and you're into football, you know all the stats of your team. Well, his isn't necessarily on football, but it'll be like currently he was doing Nerf guns. And then it was Pokemon, and then it's some books that he's reading that were the Brown Encyclopedia Brown. You know, he would just like devour that whole subject and be able to talk about it. And then he was into nuclear physics and nuclear submarines and, you know, just all kinds of different subjects. But he'll go into it and he'll look at the history of it and research that and just be able to tell you dissertations on the things. You're just like, I didn't even know that.
Well, that's really a remarkable point. And what you're saying is that if we're you and Allison are homeschool mom and dad, and that the fact that there's a lot of lenity, there's a lot of personal direction, but also you can allow for these particular excesses. The genius always has some excessive in one area or the other. And I would say as a Christian, every person has genius. Even a gang member in the worst part of Chattanooga has a genius, and you know, hopefully God will give grace to everyone that they can find that genius and work on it and have it resourced so that they can flourish and blossom and provide service to others and prosperity to all, perhaps. Yeah,
I would say that too. I think a portion of it, like when I was in school, and I think I'm going to talk to this subject, and that is, I did not have a very good direction. It was sort of, you go in, you take a class, and you learn general things. You didn't have any real interest because your interests were given to you by other people that didn't have a choice on what they were going to give you. And so I had no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up, as they say.
You mean even at the end of high school?
Yeah, no idea. I just knew that I was probably going to be in engineering because I like building things. I like making things work. You know, if I went to a camping site, like out in the wilderness, I would build like a dam or a bridge that went over the water. I built stuff. And so I knew that engineering was probably my interest. It's just what kind of engineering, because there's so many, and how to do that and do it well. I didn't necessarily have all the tools to do that right when I got out of college, and so I chose to kind of figure things out for a little bit, for about a couple years, and then move into the engineering field.
Well, the engineering field you ended up in is programming. Are you an engineer still, or just a programmer? Is that somehow different?
So programming and engineering are similar in the sense that you're solving problems. You're solving people's problems. You're finding out how to interface between a person and data, and how to make that easy in a workflow that makes sense to the user. And that is an engineering. It's an engineering field. It's yeses and nos. Is this true or is this not true? And then you're just asking tons and tons of questions of people like that, but without them actually seeing the yes and no questions.
And you work at home as a programmer, and you're in the orthodontic management software field.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Now you're living in Appleton. You have 6 acres of land. How does land? How does earth? How do shrubs, bushes, trees, briar patches, little bits of water, mud? How do they help you be a better dad, Dustin Sprague?
That's unending work. So basically, it builds character. You don't necessarily want to do a thing, but you know you should do a thing.
Such as?
And so you do it. And what would that thing be? Like, let's say it's like mowing the grass. It's getting rid of the poison ivy that grows everywhere under your trees, and your kids are going to walk through it. So you know that it's better if you actually do the work and get it taken care of ahead of time than have them come into the house with poison oak all over, or poison ivy all over them, and itch for nights and be up all night, and then you don't get sleep, which I've experienced.
Well, tell me now, in the context of children, Dustin, how does living in a space that is highly geographical, there's a lot of sense of food and nourishment and the cycles of God's creation when you live in nature more. Talk about that in your children.
Right. So when you're doing homeschooling, you'll find that your kids don't have a lot of attention span. So it's a good way to get them out and doing something physical that they're learning about. So if you're working on math, then that's great. So go count how many nails you're using in this board when you're putting it together. And that's, for my little kids. Or maybe you give them a certain number of nails. How many nails do you need? Make them make a choice. And then they're like, oh, I needed more than 6. Or, so how many more than 6 do you need? How many is that? So those kinds of individual learning at a young age, and then you get older kids. So my son, who's the older one, he would be
the 10-year-old.
Yeah, my 10-year-old. So we got some pulleys and ropes and stuff like that to work with. So we're going to probably be learning here a little bit later how pulleys work and how it can make lifting things a little easier by using mechanical.
Is that purely
advantages.
an educational acquisition, or do you plan to have a beam where you can lift an engine out of a car? Say
these are right now they're just small. So I'm thinking I'm hoping we can use them to like lift. So basically, okay, so we have some chickens, right? My son wants to build a chicken coop that he can take around in a wagon and put his chickens in there. So getting that chicken coop on and off is going to be kind of tough because it gets a little heavy. And so using some of these pulleys to be able to hoist that up and lift it up into the air and then put it back down on top of the wagon.
His red Rider wagon?
Something like that. Well, we have a little bit more robust ones nowadays. So bigger wheels, goes over dirt a little bit easier. So because we got a lot of dirt. And, learning how to raise chickens or other animals as we progress. So we're starting out with little steps. We're starting out with chickens. And then we're going to move up to maybe some other smaller animals, maybe goats or something like that.
Well, in the extreme of this world of chickens, you have the Joel Salatin book on chickens.
Right.
Tell my listener, if you know about him, what that kind of thinking is, and how there's something natural and wonderful in a more natural rearing of chickens.
So
moving.
From what I understand, I have a little bit of experience with Joel, and then and Salazar, sorry, and he has what they call chicken tractor, and what he will do is he'll take his fence and his chickens and he'll move them around his acreage and let them just basically devour all the foliage, till up the ground, and then all their extra
droppings.
Yeah, chicken droppings.
The best part.
Yep, which is great for gardens. It's amazing stuff. It's way too potent for your garden to just put straight on, and so you get into the David the Good, which is like how to compost and use chicken manure inside of your compost to just really grow your garden. And so it's all these things that we're just starting to do, but we're taking small steps, and we're not in a hurry, and we're trying to just get an idea of how to do it, try some things out, really science, right? So it's getting and making it work. How's this working? Okay, well, we needed a little bit more fence, so we got another extra 100 feet of fence. And so now we have a chicken area that isn't like completely desolate, right? And so we can move our chickens around without totally.
So you have a paddock in a fence, and then you're going to be planning to move the little enclosure around in that
so
field.
So the chicken coop, quote unquote, is like a small little chicken coop, and the chickens go in there at night, and you wheel them somewhere else, and then you would put it down, and then the chickens in the daytime they go free inside of the fence. Yeah, so they have it's free range without getting them killed, because we had one chicken who flew the coop in the sense, right? He jumped outside the fence, and then what happened is we think it's a possum went ahead and ate it, at least a portion of it. And so we're protecting our chickens for ourselves because we want to raise them, and boy, does that cause distress in my children when one of their chickens perishes. It was a grievous day.
Well, it's a loss of property. It's a loss of futurity that chicken represents, which in the way of eggs or selling that chicken to a butcher,
or eating it,
or eating it. So, and how are your children learning about prosperity and creating new things, essentially from the hand of God through chickens? Is there what's ahead in their expansion of the knowledge of, let's say, the marketplace in that endeavor?
At this stage, they're fairly young, so doing the general menial tasks of like mowing the grass and moving the chicken coop, or feeding the chickens, watering the chickens every day, putting the chickens away at night, opening the chickens in the morning early so they can get out and get going without, those kinds of things this is where your food comes from. Okay, so there's a way to do it humanely and do it in a way is not stressful on the chickens. The chickens are going to die at some point anyway, and they're God's gift to us, so they're food. so there's that part of it, but there's also the side of it that they're your animals and you get to take care of them, and that's an important thing to learn, in how to engender the heart of your kids.
Well, I want to get to the question of the heart, Dustin Sprick of Apison, but first I want to ask about the 4-year-old. What are his biggest jobs? and how has this rural setting encouraged him in his growth as a boy and then eventually a man?
So he's going to be the one that, this is all he's going to ever remember, really, is living out in the woods, in a sense, and on a field and a farm and with animals and stuff. So he is going to be the guy who probably loves animals the most anyway. He's going to want a dog someday. It's going to be a challenge for him not to have a dog, but at least at this point. But I would say that for him, his big tasks are really just arranging things. Like he'll pick up shoes and put them all away, or he'll arrange plates in a certain order, or maybe set a table or something like that.
Does he set the table tonight?
Tonight,
Friday night.
Yeah. He has certain tasks on certain days, so we kind of switch around and swap around.
What are the young man's tasks today, Dustin?
Today is going to be I believe he's sorting books upstairs. We have a lot of books on a bookshelf, and so he's going to go through and make sure all the books get on the bookshelf, and then he's very detail oriented, so he's going to end up sorting them either by color or by type. It just depends on the day.
And mom allows, Allison, your wife, allows that.
Yep, exactly.
So, okay. Well, you mentioned there are advantages to being home educating, kind of family-centered life of your children. In what ways, Dustin, are these results of being a homeschool family in a kind of rural, quasi-rural, near the city setting? What are the most dramatic things you've seen in the development, the Christian development, the character development of your 4 children?
Okay, so originally we lived in a neighborhood, and so neighborhoods are really good for being around other people and different people, and they raise their kids different than you would raise your kids, and so their influences on our kids could be good with some kids and not as good with other kids, and most of that had to do with the fact that they weren't aware of what their kids were doing, and we were a lot more aware of what our kids were doing. Not to say that our kids are perfect or great. They're still sinners, and it's just a struggle every day to work on their hearts. But I think that change away from that influence made a huge difference in their attitudes towards parents, for one.
Well, how so?
For adults, a lot less disrespectful. So now that Allison and I are kind of their main points of contact, and then also their grandparents who live in the city, that's just been a huge boon for their development as far as accountability.
So when your daughter, who's 9, stands in front of you and you're sort of demanding if she has done a certain task, and is her answer to be yes, Dad, or no, Dad, or just yeah?
It is.
Do you insist on certain forms to encourage respect?
Sometimes I've met a lot of people that use the yes, sir, and she does that if she knows that it's important to do at the time. It's not typically required of her, though. I don't do that yet. It's not a bad idea, though.
Well, in my house, my children were instructed to always say Dad or Mom, yes, Dad, or yes, Mom, or no, Mom, and that way they have it ingrained in them that you always say sir to the lowliest person my son might meet. I have a son, 21, who's a motorcyclist, and he confronts police officers and asks them questions, like he was asking them, as he told me, how is it that you can run unmarked cars in Nashville? He's a motorcyclist with a gun. And he has many encounters with police officers, but always is very respectful. Yes, sir. No, sir. And he has that because he got it at my house. Well, this is David Tulis. We're talking with Dustin Sprick, who is a homeschool dad. We're promoting today and somewhat sponsoring the event in East Ridge. It's at Camp Jordan. It's the Homeschool Expo. Dustin will be there much of the time as a helper today. And I'll be there today at noon. If you want to come by, please ask for me, David Tulis. I'll have my name tag on in big type, David Tulis. And I'm here, your host here at Nooga Radio. We argue for local economy and the free markets. And Dustin I've got some more questions for Dustin. It touches on the nature of cities and the future. We're talking about a future of many prospects, especially as the debt-based, humanistic, administrative-controlled system of the world that is national economy and national government are failing. They're failing, and at some point there are going to be some dramatic collapses of various parts, such as Obamacare right now is collapsing. What are you going to do pending these developments that are going to be devastating for most people, but not for you. You, my listener, if you're paying attention and you're thinking local-centrically, here's the advice. Divest national and invest local.
The Tennessee Valley's news, talk, and sports leader. Nooga Radio, AM 1240 and 92.7